With just a few days until the NHL trade deadline, teams are starting to feel the pressure. And every NHL team needs something. Whether that's a big trade, a small move, or nothing at all, every team has a strategy and a game plan for this deadline. So today we're going to be breaking down the needs of your favorite team as well as the rest of the NHL to see what major trades we could see happening on deadline day. So make sure you watch till the end for all the team needs and what fixes could potentially come. And hit that subscribe button if you're new for more hockey content just like this, presented by BetUS. Now, starting us out here in the Pacific Division for the trade deadline needs, we're going to go to a team here who I don't think really needs that much, and that is the Anaheim Ducks. If there's anything I want the Ducks to go after, it's a second-round pick in this year's draft. They traded their pick away to the Flyers in that Cutter Gauthier trade, which is completely fair, but I do think they could use a little bit more than that, and we'll see if they can get it with the crop they have. Among the Ducks rental options, Dumoulin is the one most talked about, and rightfully so. I don't think he's going to get a lot of attention or value, more likely a third or fourth round pick at this deadline, but he's a solid bottom pair defenseman who gets the job done, reliable, and is somebody you can leave and not worry about. For a lot of contenders, that's pretty valuable there, but we'll see if the Ducks actually get a second. In general, though, especially since the Four Nations break, they've been a ton of fun to watch, and I honestly don't think they should tinker with much. Now we go into the Calgary Flames, and we go into a team here that I also think, like Anaheim, is going to be relatively quiet at this deadline. There might be a couple of smaller moves, trading away a couple of depth pieces here and there, but nothing substantial. Now, as I'll make clear throughout this video, this isn't what I think teams will do, it's what I think teams should do with their needs, and what I would do if I was running them at this year's deadline. Calgary is no exception, and if I were in charge, I would actually make a pretty big trade, going away with Rasmus Andersson in a contract year. As a pending UFA, Andersson is fine, had a fantastic start to the season, but has really trailed off since then, and I think is showing what his true value really is. Kind of up that Philip Roenick in this contract year valley, where I think if you give him a big payday, he'll be fine for you, but not that overwhelming force that you need him to be. In Andersson's case, I think he's solid for Calgary, but I think especially when you look at a player like Zane Parekh coming up on that right side, I think it makes Andersson way more expendable. And I know Calgary is in the race, but I don't think they would do much if they were to make the playoffs. I think heading in a more young direction should be the direction Calgary is always going for here, and a trading Andersson would be what I would personally do. Now we go into the Edmonton Oilers, who have their work cut out for them, of course, with limited cap space every single year. They always have to get a little bit creative, and at this year's deadline, I see them doing the same thing. Now, I think Edmonton will go after a defensive ad, especially to replace a player like Troy Stecher, who I think just isn't up to that level anymore, but I think a player like Connor Murphy could be up to that task, but I think most likely a player like Ryan Dumoulin fits that bill, and I think Dumoulin makes a lot of sense as well for the Oilers. I think he gives a little bit more offense than Connor Murphy does, and as well as the term, Dumoulin is a rental, while Murphy has 1 year left in his contract, which I think could keep Edmonton out of it. Now going on to the LA Kings, who have been a pretty well-oiled machine up to this point. The big thing and the big man I would immediately put if I was running the team was to give Brandt Clarke more minutes, especially on offensive situations. I don't know why they're handling him the way they are right now, but otherwise, I think the big thing I would look for is especially a left wing who can be just a pure goal scorer, somebody that is able to bang and crash, make the game simple, and come up in those big moments. That's something I think LA has really needed in the playoffs, and something I'm not sure if they're going to have. In terms of my absolute ideal candidate for this spot, I think Rickard Rakell would be perfect. He has been so stellar for Pittsburgh this year in so many ways. The goal scoring has been a pretty big one, though, getting 28 goals on a pace for 37 goals, which would be the highest in his career. I think that type of element is sorely missed for LA, and something that would really complete that top 9, at least for me. More likely, though, LA is not going to want to spend the assets to get a player like Rakell, so it's more likely going to be a player like Jason Zucker, who's still pretty solid and actually having a really underrated year, on pace for 64 points this year and 26 goals. That could be a more buy low candidate that I think could be likely as well. Now onto the San Jose Sharks, and they're also a team that I don't want to see too much movement from. They've traded a lot of their great players over the last couple of years, and I think tearing it down even more could be pretty detrimental. A guy like Tyler Toffoli, yes, will get some value out there, but I think he's just too important to that leadership and to the younger players on that team to get rid of him personally. For me, if they're going to trade for anyone, I want them to go after younger talent that can play immediately. Guys like JJ Peterka, Lucas Reichel, and even on the defensive side of Bowen Byram. Again, it's not likely for it to happen that way, but if they do trade for anyone, go for younger talent that can play now, that can help guys like Celebrini for next year. Now on to the Vancouver Canucks, and they're a team that can go all over the place. Personally, for me, I would be in the situation where, sure, if you make the playoffs this year, that's great, but most likely, I think it's going to be a disappointing year, even if they do make it. For me, I would prioritize beefing up and loading up for next year, because that's when I think things really do matter, especially with Quinn Hughes' contract coming up quick. This is another team that I would love to see going after younger talent, but if they're going to go after anybody, I want them to go after players with term, at least another year on his contract. I mentioned a player like Oliver Bjorkstrand in my predictions video, potentially going to the Canucks. I think he'd be a great fit there, and he's making relatively low money, $5.4 million for this year and next, and he's just an efficient middle six winger, always has, and can play up the lineup if he really needs to. That's somebody I think the Canucks should bring in to just get a change up the lineup, somebody different, somebody with new blood in there, and I think the Canucks could really use that. No matter who they go for, just do not go for rentals, man. This is not the year to go for it. Now, one of the Vegas Golden Knights, and they're a team that I don't think needs to do too much. I would have said going after a bottom pair defenseman in the place of Kaden Korczak, but he's only really there because of the Shea Theodore injury, and once he's back, I think the defense will be just fine. In terms of the forward group there, that's the situation where I think they could maybe tinker a little bit, especially with the bottom six there. You could maybe get a third line right wing to potentially put Kolzar down to the fourth line, or maybe just get somebody that can be a definitive improvement on a player like Pearson or Lavoie. They're fine, but they're not true needle movers. Maybe Vegas goes after somebody like that, but with how well they played this season, I don't think you really need to tinker with any of the major stuff. Now, before we keep going, let's first talk about today's sponsor in BetUS, the place to make your hockey picks all throughout the season, and there is so many options, whether it's with this deadline or past it. You can go through, of course, every single NHL game and the different odds for each team if you want to make picks on your favorite team there. So many options with the over, under, and money line there. You could also go for the special odds to make the playoffs for different teams, and there's some pretty interesting ones out there too. You have a team like Calgary who's in the mix, yes, at plus 300. Could be interesting value if they were to sneak in, but you also got the odds for every single trophy, and of course, the Stanley Cup this year. A lot to potentially go through, but if you want to make your picks down below, just use code YouTube150 when you sign up, and you'll get a 150% sign-up bonus on your first deposit and 125% sign-up bonus on your next two deposits after that. And let's get right back into the video. Now, one of the Chicago Blackhawks, and this is the exact same situation to me with the San Jose Sharks, but even more so. I think what the Blackhawks need more of is young, established talent. You look at that defense and how much they're likely to be trading this year on top of Seth Jones, potentially Connor Murphy. To me, a player like Bowen Byram is a slam dunk move to make. They need more reinforcements there. They need somebody that is young, that will be able to build with this future core, but also can still play, can still bring some effort, some skill there, and actually isn't going to be overwhelmed by the maturity of the NHL since they've already been a part of it. I think for Chicago, they need to get something. They need to get somebody that can be a part of this core going forward, because if they don't, next year, I think could be even worse than it was this year. I think with how much we've seen them strip it down even more, we will see that, but if they do bring in players, I think they need to be younger. I think this team needs more skill. A lot of the free agents they brought in have been players like Alec Martinez and Pat Maroon, and they're fine veteran leaders, but they're not leaders on the ice consistently. I think they need somebody that can be up to that level, play up to the level of players like Bedard, and give them somebody that can really stick with and build chemistry for a long time. Now, going to the Colorado Avalanche and their big need this deadline, to me it's pretty simple. It's a solidified second line center. Now, with their cap space being the way it is at $3.2 million for the deadline, it's going to be a little bit tricky to get a player like that, but somebody like Brock Nelson, who we talked about ad nauseum throughout this deadline season, I think would be perfect for the Avs. Somebody that can be a replacement for Casey Middlestat, who will likely also be dealt, I think is a necessity. Middlestat just has not been it. He's not been the fit that they needed. And I think they need a true definitive replacement. They could have a situation too, or maybe they have a player like Nelson coming in and maybe they don't trade Middlestat. Maybe he's the third line center. I think that's okay. That can work still. But I think they need to give themselves a bigger chance with that middle six and give them a center reinforcement that can actually help the forwards around him. I mean, look at the wings and players like Nichushkin. I think a player like Nelson would be perfect with that. Now, looking at my Dallas Stars and what I would do if I was them, to me, it's really the big thing that I just keep going back to. It is a definitive top four right defenseman. And the Stars have done so much to acquire so many different guys that they think can be at that level. Players like CC, Dumba, and Lyubushkin, I guess, has been fine this year. But I still think they need one guy that can really carry minutes and just allow the Stars to play so much more free. That's what they got in Chris Tanev last year. And even though the result in the end wasn't what they wanted, I thought he was brilliant all throughout his tenure there and immediately made a major impact. I think they need somebody to not be Cody Ceci on that second pair, because I think if I have to watch him in the playoffs, I might die. Now, going on to the Minnesota Wild, and I think the situation is relatively similar to Dallas as well, where things have gone well this season, but I look at that right side and I see a bit of a weakness there with John Merrill as the bottom pair defenseman. It is obviously a bottom pair spot, so it's not the highest priority. But for the Wild, most of these things have gone well. It's just injuries have really plagued them, especially recently with players like Kaprizov and Brodin being out. But I look at Merrill, who's always kind of been a big, obvious weakness. He has its moments, but he's just not as much of a defensive stalwart as he was even a couple of years ago. I think for the Wild, upgrading on him is a necessity, especially if they want to bolster that defense come playoff time. And going on to the Nashville Predators here, we're going to go on to a team that has a lot of issues, a lot of things to fix, and to me, I don't think it's going to be fixed until they completely tear it down. And that is to me what I would do if I'm Nashville. I would get rid of so much of this core because really it was kind of iffy to see how much all of these different older players would have fit on the roster. And they're not getting any younger. And I don't think even if Nashville tries to completely go for it next year, retooling so much of that roster, if it's really going to pan out. Because guys like Stamkos, Brady Shea, they've had their ups and downs. And especially in Stamkos' case, he's just not in Nashville. I don't know what's wrong there, but it is brutal to watch. Nashville has a pretty underrated prospect pool and a lot of guys already on the roster who are making big impacts like Evangelista, but I just feel like they need a lot more that is consistent, that could be NHL ready. If Nashville wants to potentially go for it next year, I think they're going to have to add a lot of younger talent that can actually play, that could be consistent for them, because a lot of their veteran players are just not living up to the expectations. And then we're going to go on to another team that I kind of debated saying nothing for, and that is the St. Louis Blues. For me, I don't think they should change much, at least for what they can. If it was me, I mean, I would change a lot of that defense, but almost all of them have no move clauses, so it would become a lot more difficult to do so. In terms of the realistic expectations, though, I mean, they could add to that pick cupboard quite a bit. You look at it, and for how many trades they made over the last few years, it's interesting to see their pick situation now, because in this year's draft, they have only their first, fifth, and sixth round picks. No second, third, fourth, or seventh rounders, and I think for the Blues, that is a pretty obvious weakness. Getting at least a second rounder for this year, I think, is a necessity with how many players they have potentially in play. And I feel like for them, getting that pick cupboard stock back up is a big priority here. Now on to the Utah Hockey Club, and I want to warn them right now that I don't really know what they're going to do. They're a team that, I'll be honest, is a team that I could absolutely see there being a big swing for the trade deadline this year. They have the cap space, they have the prospects, they have the picks to make big deals. But to me personally, I don't think Utah should. If they're going to do anything, it should be selling. I don't think this is the year to fully go for it. I think it would be kind of a slap in the face of the rebuild that has been so successful so far with so many younger players to potentially get rid of them, to try and bolster this team for now. I just don't see it as a big priority for them to make the playoffs this year. They'll be fun. They've already been successful ticket-wise this year. Next year is when I think when they can afford to start going for it, afford to start getting a lot better. But I think for Utah, their core has been so good already, and they have much of it already coming up. I think staying patient is the big thing for me. If they want to offload some of the rentals like Alex Kerfoot or Ian Cole, by all means, go ahead. That's what I would personally do. I wouldn't tinker with the main core of this team because I still think it's fantastic and will be. Just let them cook. Now we go into another team in the Central Division that I don't think should do anything, and for a much different reason. That is the Winnipeg Jets. And again, honestly, nothing. I don't think they should change anything. I see a lot of people saying they should change the second line center position, potentially getting an upgrade on Logan Stanley. And in theory, I would be on board with you. But I feel like they're in a similar situation to Washington, where their chemistry and the way they've all bonded together has been just so special that personally, I wouldn't even change anything. Maybe you go after a depth defenseman, maybe you go after a third pair D. That's what I would do if I was to do anything. But honestly, for the Jets, it's been working so well. Why change it? Now advancing us forward into the Eastern Conference in the Metro Division, let's start out with the Carolina Hurricanes, who I think are a team that's going to be fascinating now with Mikko Rantanen and the trade speculation there. I don't think they should trade him personally. I think he will eventually sort it out. At least I'm hoping. The big thing I would look to change is that center situation. Now, they might not go after a top center. Brock Nelson is really the only one that I think could be a definitive upgrade as the second line center there. But I could see a situation where they look to upgrade that fourth line center spot. Tyson Jost currently has that. But I could see a situation where maybe they go after a Jake Evans or somebody to fill that spot perfectly, which I think would be amazing. That type of defensive presence, the face-off ability at a fourth line center rate would be brilliant for the Hurricanes. I don't think they need to tinker too much now, at least if Rantanen is going to work out. But I think that fourth line center spot, shoring it up a little bit with more of a defensive presence, could work out well. Now we move on to the Columbus Blue Jackets, and this is another team like Utah where I say don't change anything. The Blue Jackets have been hot. They've been great, especially since the Four Nations break. They have been unbelievable, and I don't think they should change anything with this group. The chemistry is there, as well as the future. In Utah's case, compared to Utah, at least, Columbus has been even more successful. They've been even more consistent this season and actually have a good chance of making the playoffs. I think a rental is completely out of the question. Don't even think about it. But I also think in terms of some of the UFAs, I would personally be kind of fine if they were to just let Ivan Provorov walk, even if that is the situation, just because this Columbus team, I think, just needs the vibes to stay this way. They need to keep rolling this way. And if they are to make the playoffs, that is such a boost for next season. I don't think they should be buying by any means, But I think if they sell off major pieces of the team, I would be a little bit disappointed because personally, I want to see them make it, but I don't want to see them sacrifice their future. It's a tight line to walk, but for Columbus, there's good news because they don't have to do anything here. Now we go into the New Jersey Devils, who I think are in a much different position than Columbus, where they really want to start going for it here. It's interesting now with the Jack Hughes injury because we heard before, even before, that they were basically guaranteed to trade for a center. Now it's 110% confirmed they're going to be trading for a center now that Jack Hughes is out. I don't think they're going to be anybody going after a guy that can go up to the presence of a player like Hughes. But I think they will be going after a middle 6C. I speculate about Jake Evans and Yoel Armia, combo duo going to New Jersey. I think Jake Evans would be perfect for the team, though. In terms of the defensive habits he provides, especially on that bottom six, I think he would be perfect depth for them. So to me, Evans is your guy. Now on to the New York Islanders. And to me, the big need for them is to face the facts. Buddy, you're not a good team, and you need to realize it fast. Because I think for the Islanders, they have a situation here, and they have an opportunity, really, to go in a younger direction and actually execute it well. They've gotten some great luck with a lot of their younger players that have been developed recently. You got Siplikov, who's been a great player for them, but a player like Holmstrom has been having a great year. You look at the defense, and you got a younger player on the side like Isaiah George, who's been solid in North America already. Romanov is playing well this season. I think for them, heading in a youthful direction is possible, but it really starts here. Brock Nelson, you have to trade him. It's inexplicable if they were to re-sign him. There's nothing to go for. This team has already proven that even with all these guys on the older side, they aren't able to make the playoffs with them. Why do you think it would get better when they're another year older? It's just not going to happen. Same thing with Kyle Palmieri. Same thing for a player like Anders Lee. Same thing for a player like Jean-Gabriel Pageau. Literally everybody you can get value for, get it. Because I think for this Islanders team, they have some good prospects coming up, especially on the forward side like Quinn Finley and Cole Eisenman. Give them younger pieces to work with and not retirement home dues that they won't even be able to really have success with. Now onto the New York Rangers, and they're a team that I could see making some additions onto that forward group, and I was really tempted to say a third line piece that could potentially be in the place of a Johnny Brodzinski. I could absolutely see that. To me, though, I just look at that defense, man, and oh my goodness. If the Rangers want to make the playoffs this year, I do not know if they're going to survive with it. They did, of course, just trade Ryan Lindgren after the injuries to Adam Fox, and in the past, Keandre Miller, but it's rough. I think for New York, changing that defense up as much as possible is a good idea, so we'll see what happens there. But first pair, Will Borgen, I would change that personally. Now onto the Philadelphia Flyers, and after a season of weird retooling in ways, but also trading younger players like Morgan Frost and Joel Verity, I think finding their identity for the future is really important, but it also continues with this draft. And they know that, especially with how much they've loaded up in the first two rounds of this draft. They got 3 first-rounders and 4 second-rounders. The big thing for me, though, that I want to see Philly do in this deadline is get more 2026 picks. This draft is fairly weak, I will say. It drops off quite big, but I think for the Flyers, they're still kind of in this weird retooling mode, but I think next year's draft is a position where they could really start maximizing some value. We'll see what ends up happening there, but I think especially in the second round, I would like to see them get a little more depth and bring up even more prospects in that pool that I think could use more reinforcements. Now going on to the Pittsburgh Penguins, and in terms of the team needs, do I have like a whole day to talk about it? I literally could talk about this Penguins team and what they can need for ages. The big thing that I will stress, though, is trading who you need to trade. Trading guys while they still have value. Rickard Rakell has been amazing, and I've seen a lot of people saying, why are we going to trade him? He's on such a great contract. You trade him because he's on a great contract, and that will get you even more value. Sure, he's great now, but he's 31 years old and has always been the definition of inconsistency. While he's riding high, you got to trade him. It's a necessity, and I don't care what Pittsburgh's position is, that they still have Crosby, they still have Malkin. Get a younger player for Rakell. Get somebody that can pull up in the lineup. You had a Michael Bunting, who was great before the injuries there, and last season after the trade deadline was an immediate impact piece. Go after somebody even younger than that can make an impact, because Pittsburgh needs more that any younger player that they can get. But that also goes to the defense. A player like Erik Karlsson, if you could trade him, trade him. It's just not going to work there. And even though he has some great attributes, it has been a failure in his time with Pittsburgh. If you can trade these older presences, you absolutely have to. You also, like the Islanders, have to face the facts, because if you're ever going to put a competitive team in front of Crosby again, it has to be with younger players who can play, because this older group has just not gotten it done consistently. And while you're at it, literally acquire any other goaltender, because oh boy. Now to the Washington Capitals, and they're a team that I could see making some changes, potentially with the depth, but for me personally, just like Winnipeg, it's nothing. Do not do anything, and in fact, don't overreact. I think for Washington, one of the big reasons why this team has been so exciting and so much of a surprise has been that younger presence. don't tinker with that. Don't tinker with the chemistry they've already been able to build and how successful they've been. This Caps team is going to be really solid for a long time, but you just need to keep it that way. Don't go for it in any single year. Even if Ovi is on the older side, sure. I think you'll give him more opportunities, more down the line because of the youth you're already building and because of how successful that development has been. Keep that strengths going forward. Now on to the Boston Bruins, and they're a team that also I think needs to face the facts, but also specifically targeting younger players who already have NHL maturity. One of the big things that I think has gone right for Boston in some ways has been some of the youthful players. Guys like Morgan Geekie have been great this year, even though he's on still more the older side. But a player like Matthew Poitras still has potential. On the defense, Mason Lohrei has been great this year. You have some guys that are putting in great effort and are turning the tide of this Boston franchise. It's just not enough to make a true impact. And I think for the Bruins, they need to also face that this year might not be a playoff season. I think they need to offload, they need to retool. If they want to go for it next year, sure, you can do that. But this season is so clearly not the year. And I think younger talent, especially a player like a Bowen Byram, who could give them some puck moving ability, I think would be awesome to see. Somebody that is different for this team, that is young, and hey, bring up Fabian Lysell while you're at it, please. On to the Buffalo Sabres, and to me, their biggest need is just to go after somebody that can play defense on the right side next season. It's something that I think is a clear need for the Sabres team to get a solidified second pair right shot D. And we'll see if that's actually available in the market, especially with Rasmus Andersson likely not getting dealt. I think he would be awesome for the Sabres, but somebody in the more defensive mind and somebody that can actually give them some stability. It's a clear problem for the Sabres team and something that I think is more likely to be addressed in the offseason, but if they can address it now, I'd like that too. Now onto the Detroit Red Wings, and my pick for their need is a middle six center. We talked about it potentially in the predictions video about them potentially going after Brock Nelson as a second line center option. That would be awesome, but I don't even think you need to go that high. If it's a player like a Jake Evans or even a player like Scott Lawton, that would be an improvement over a player like Joe Veleno at that third line center spot. Because of the injury to Andrew Kopp, it makes Detroit's situation a little bit more interesting. I personally would still maybe go for a player like with term, but considering Kopp will be back next season, hopefully healthy, they don't need a third line center long term just for the rest of this year. With how well Detroit has been playing and how much they're chopping at the bit to get into the playoffs, how close they are, that extra little bit of push could sink or swim them. Now onto the Florida Panthers, and with the Seth Jones trade, they're a team that I think has relatively few weaknesses. Maybe they go after another top six piece on the right side, putting a player like Evan Rodrigues down to the third line, but I don't think it's necessarily a make or break thing for them, as well as the defense, which I think is pretty solidified up to this point. The big thing I'd like to see them go after is a backup goaltender. Sergei Bobrovsky, of course, is still fantastic, but Chris Driedger has been awful in the AHL this year and is kind of up and down in terms of his actual NHL potential still. He's somebody that I just don't have much confidence in as a backup, and I think for Bobrovsky, the big thing will be keeping him rested for the playoffs this year. And Driedger, I don't think you're going to really have that option, so I think going for a backup goaltender who can play some games here down the stretch will be important. Now for Montreal, this is another team that I want to see stay relatively pat, but of course trade the obvious players like Jake Evans, like a Yoel Armia. The big thing that I want to see though is to freaking trade Josh Anderson already. This is just ridiculous. It seems like we always go through these ups and downs with Anderson and his trade rumor stock, because whenever he's playing horribly, and that's a lot of the time, quite frankly, the talk is that how we can't trade, it's impossible to trade him, he's so bad, it's awful. And then he scores like 10 goals this year, and we're like, oh no, we gotta keep him, he's such an important piece in the playoffs. Are you listening to yourself right now? Josh Anderson in the big 2025, if there's any value for him, especially with his contract, if you get a 6th rounder, trade the man. I do not care. You could probably call up Florian Xhekaj right now of how he's playing in the AHL and probably get better results than Anderson and probably be a much faster player. I'm sorry, I just don't get it. And if Montreal can find a trade for Anderson this deadline, do it as soon as possible. Now on to Ottawa, and they're a team that I also think isn't going to tinker with too much here, especially when it comes to the core. They're just fine. The big thing I think that they will add though is a third pair defensive D, whether that's hopefully an upgrade on Travis Hamonic, because oh my goodness, whether that's a player like a Brian Dumoulin or a Carson Soucy, somebody with experience I think will bring more of a defensive presence. Nothing too fancy, but I don't think for Ottawa they necessarily need to. They're in a position where they can do anything and I think be fine, but I think especially on that right side, getting an upgrade there is important. Now on to Tampa Bay, and they're also a pretty simple team here. I think the big thing for them is potentially getting a right wing upgrade. Zemgus Girgensons is in a top 6 is just criminal, but Tampa Bay has been playing unbelievable as of late, so maybe they don't want to tinker with anything there. If Tampa goes quiet, I wouldn't be all that concerned, especially with the cap space there. They aren't in a competition here to go after any of the big players, but still, going after a depth guy who could maybe rise in the lineup, that's maybe something I would look at. And then finally, we go on to the Toronto Maple Leafs, and this is maybe the biggest thing for me for the Leafs, and that is a third line center upgrade. Max Domi has just not been it in really any single way, and I think especially as a third line center, he's going to get carved up in the playoffs. He's just not that type of bottom six centerman who could match up against those guys. I think getting somebody like a Jake Evans or somebody more simplistic like a Scott Laughton could work out for the Leafs there. Just somebody that's different than Domi, because I just don't think it's been working all year, and he's somebody that, especially with the goal scoring, I just don't have belief in him being a big impact player for the Leafs this season, whether it's in the playoffs or the regular season. But those are my trade needs for every single team and what we could potentially see as options for each of them. Let me know in the comments down below what you guys agree, what you guys disagree with, and what do you see your team doing at this deadline? What do you see as their biggest need, and what do you see them doing when it's all said and done? Let me know your thoughts down below. Of course, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell if you haven't already, and share it with all the hockey fans you guys know online. And click on this card for all my hockey prospects, talk around one playlist as well, and sign up to Bet US today using code YouTube150. I'll see you guys in the next one though. Have a fantastic one, and goodbye.